This week on Filthy Hope.
I was born in 1969 and I was one of the forced adoptions. So what happened in the 60s and early 70s, but mostly the 60s, was the Catholic Church and the government decided that single mothers were not worthy of being parents, and they coerced, cajoled, drugged and stole children from their rightful parents, mothers, and gave them to what they felt were appropriate married couples with little to no vetting. If you were married and you wanted a baby, you were given a baby.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Filthy Hope. First time here on this podcast, we spend time in the grey spaces where faith, life and culture intersect. As always, I'm your host, Jonty, and I'm joined by my co-host, Ness. How are you?
Hey! How exciting is today, Jonty?
Pretty stoked because joining us on the Zoom, we have a very special guest, Ajay Rochester. Welcome to the podcast.
Why, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Ness, you and AJ know each other. Do you want to briefly maybe explain how far back?
Yeah, I would, Jonty, absolutely. AJ, thanks for joining us, because what time is it in the US right now, babe?
It's 7 p.m. on Saturday night.
Nice.
It's a good thing I'm too old to be partying, because you're like, are you in on 7 p.m. Saturday night? Yes.
Party's here.
Yeah, that's right.
But you look like you're about to go on a party, babe. You've got hair and makeup and looking very glam, so thank you.
I made an effort. It's the first time in a few weeks I've thrown it on. Makes quite a difference.
It does, doesn't it?
Still got it.
Go, girl. For any of our magnificent listeners and viewers, AJ is an absolute epic of a human being, hence why we invited her to come on the show today. She's got an incredible life story that will only enrich you by listening and getting to know her. She's one of those absolutely magnificently authentic human beings. Bullshit doesn't happen around AJ. She just says it exactly how it is, and this is why we love her. AJ is a mum. She's an actor. She's a prolific author. She's been a TV presenter. She's currently a casting producer. She's an absolute weight loss queen. And I'm imagining some of our listeners might actually remember you, AJ, for being a host on The Biggest Loser for 4 years. So do you think and you're an ambassador for Eating Disorder Association as well. Oh my gosh, is there anything you haven't done, sister?
I know. It's like I do have the hashtag YOLO9, you only live 9 lives. I have done a few different things. But everything old is new again. Everything new is old again. I don't know. I just do wherever my heart takes me.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I've had the privilege of knowing you from when you were a young woman. And I was wondering.
Long time.
I know. And as we were building what we were going to be doing with you, your email is so epic. I love. Am I actually allowed to say your email?
Yeah,
address?
You can say it. It's public. Yeah. It's all over the internet.
Yeah, it's the real AJ. That's how it goes, doesn't it?
No, there's only one AJ.
There's only one AJ. And I was just thinking, oh my God, there's only one AJ. And there we go. I reckon we could do a series. There's only one AJ. It could be an incredible podcast series. So let's see how we go today, because each of your stories in your life I know it's given me hope in tough times in my life. And I've looked to you and with great respect for how you've navigated some what I would call filthy, hopeless moments. And I watch how you just rise up and live another day and achieve even more success. You build on the success, and you're an impressive woman. And AJ, I was wondering if I've known you since, correct me if I've got any of this chronology wrong, but we met when we were enrolled in the Australian Academy of Dramatic Arts in Sydney.
Yes.
Young, aspiring actors. And
yes.
We both went through that course together. I think I was the year above you.
You were.
You came in just the year below me, and you became my sister's bestie. And the two of you were a little force and a little dynamic duo. And
ride or die.
That's right. And we had so many just incredible moments there, didn't we?
Oh my God. Honestly, it was one of the best times of my life. I was 16 when I started there, and I had dropped out of high school at the advice of my drama and English teacher to go to the Australian Academy of Dramatic Arts. I lived on a farm, like on a place called Mummlegum. It's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. It's like, oh, look, there's the end of the world. Where are we? Mummlegum, population 501 on a good day. And I grew up, and there was a flyer in our library, and I wanted to be an actress, and this place looked good and felt good, and I blew off year 12 and left home, and I left home because home was not a good place to be. So anything out of that world was like a great place to be. I was very, very violent upbringing and abusive parents. And so as soon as I was 16 years and 9 months, which was the legal age that you could move out of home, I was gone. I was like, bye.
Yeah. Wow.
And I moved out and I put myself through college, and it were great days. Like, honestly, great. I mean, it's not NIDA, but for me, it was just, it was so much fun. I loved it.
Do you remember that girl? I can't remember. I think she was in my year, AJ, and we all had different jobs to pay because I remember the fees being really expensive. And I don't think HEX was a thing in the day, was it?
No.
So we're all working our asses off to pay these exorbitant quarterly college fees to go through the 3-year full-time program. I remember, and we all had interesting gigs. I was working as a gym instructor. What were you doing? Were you clowning?
I got into clowning when I was in college, but I was also being a pirate wench on a pirate ship on harbour cruises, basically thrusting my buxom bosom into patrons' faces while singing ay, 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 ay. And singing in a piano bar in up in King's Cross after that. And also did McDonald's. Mickey D's was like my first ever kind of, I was doing it all. And then through the college, they said, hey, do you want to go and do a clowning gig? And I was like, you mean act like an idiot and get paid for it? And I still to this day say that it was the best job I've ever had.
Yeah.
Literally the most fun. I was a clown for years. I traveled the world. I did big shows. I got paid ridiculously well for it. Getting paid to have kids pee their pants laughing. It's just.
And I remember it being the start of balloon sculpture. You were just like an epic balloon sculptor in the day when I hadn't even known about balloon sculpting as a thing. Do you know? Is that what you call it, AJ?
Yeah. I did it all. I did a little bit of magic. I'd learned to juggle. I loved it. It was just such a funny little world. And it has its own cliques. Like there was Chuckles the clown and Sparkles the clown. And, and I was Lulu the clown.
Yeah.
And I got gifted the Fair Star. So like you kind of pass on this amazing gig. You work on the Fair Star and you go on all these cruises. You get paid really well. You do 3 shows. It's like tax-free money, offshore earnings. You get to travel the world. And Chuckles the clown, he gifted it to me. And I spent, 4 or 5 years, and then I gifted it to Sparkles the clown. And, it's just some of the fondest memories that I have.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's nothing like getting your underpants put up on the flag when you've slept with the trumpeter on the cruise ship. I mean, they're just like such sweet highlights.
AJ, I remember one of the girls in college. She, we all had these interesting jobs, but I can't remember who she was. But she was a bigger girl with long, dark, curly hair. She was really exotic. And
Deborah, was it Deborah?
Was it Deborah?
We did phone sex.
Phone sex. Do you remember? And
I remember that. She was in my year.
Was she?
I did phone sex because of her, and I was terrible at it. I was like, listen, I've got the mouth of a sailor, and if Deborah can do phone sex, I can do phone sex. And so I was like, yeah, I'm doing it. $5 a minute. Heck yeah. So I signed up, and they were like, okay, the bip goes. You got to try to keep them on the phone, talk about the weather, really just get them involved. And, so the first day comes, and I'm like, hi, how are you? Oh, what's the weather like? And he's like, hurry up. And I'm like, oh, your hands caress my really big boobs. And there's like words that you can't use. And he's like, not that big. And I'm like, oh, I'm even too fat for phone sex. Okay. And then I was like, oh, And he's like, "Come on, hurry up, hurry up." And I'm like, "Oh God, is this the mail boy having a little bit of moment? His 5-minute break." And so, but I'm like, in my mind, I've got to keep them on the phone for like
That's
as
right.
long as possible. And I'm like, "Your hands wander down to my," and I'm like, "You're not allowed to use the V word or the C word." So I'm like, "My area of love." He hangs up. I've made $1. $1, and they never called me back. I failed.
Failed.
Like I knew I was immediately fired. I'm sure, like, oh, I was horrible at it.
But she was epic because she would entertain us in our breaks, I remember. And she'd say I'd sit there with she'd had a fag in her mouth and a Macca's in one hand and her legs in Uggies up on the bench. And she
yeah,
could actually do the best phone sex ever. I'm
I
like,
know
she was
she's
earning more money than any of us, AJ, at
yeah.
the time.
I often Google her. In fact, it was only last week I was looking for her again. I have not been able to find her. You know, the other thing Deborah had was the most incredible singing voice that
Yes, didn't she?
I've
Yeah.
ever heard. I mean, she should have been a star. I don't know, you know,
Incredible. Oh, happy, certainly happy days.
they were
And
great days.
so after your time at the academy, you then quickly catapulted, I remember, into stardom. I mean, you landed some really epic gigs, didn't you?
I mean, well, I think before you and I were both very lucky because
Yeah,
I really looked up to you because you were booking so many commercials because you always looked 30.
that's it.
You, when you were 17, you were booking 30-year-old mum gigs.
Yeah,
When you were 40, you were booking 30-year-old mum gigs.
I
You
know.
just, the amount of commercials that you did, and then you
Mm,
did Water Rats, and I was just like, oh my God, this woman is just amazing. So I so totally look up for you. And like technically, we were not allowed to book jobs while we were at
mm,
college, but because
mm,
you did it, I did it too.
mm,
I was like, well, heck, you know, so in between my summer of my second year and my third year, I booked a show by PJ Hogan, who ended up writing Muriel's Wedding, and I did a movie called Vicious. That was my first role, and then I think in the middle of the year, I booked George Ogilvy's The Crossing, which was one of Russell Crowe's first films.
mm,
And so I was like, and I was in this, you know, I was with Ben Oxenbould and, you know, Russell and Danielle Spencer and Robert Mamone. And, you know, so like we were kind of this little
mm.
brat packy of upcoming Australian
Actors.
actors. And then I didn't like auditioning.
Mm,
And so I just it so I was down to Gia Carides and me for Strictly Ballroom, and I found out that I didn't get it on Christmas Eve, and it hit me
oh,
hard. Like I did not want to roll more. Like I wanted it so bad, and it
mm.
broke my heart.
Oh, wow.
And I just was like, I kind of went into like a bit of a depression. And that was also around the time of like me finding my mum and losing my mum. And so a lot of stuff kind of happened around that time. So I really kind of withdrew from the acting scene and really just
Mm,
kind of, I got into stand-up comedy and I did, you know, other things, you know,
yeah.
why not do other things?
Yeah, amazing. You know, talking about your mum, thanks. I'd love to lean into that story because I remember you and I we were doing a gig with my sister. We were out at Windsor doing some panto stuff and shows out there. And are you happy to share that story about
Yeah,
your adoption and how you
absolutely.
actually the because for me, you know, the title of our show is called Filthy Hope. I think for our listeners, this story of how you found your mother is just totally epitomizes the words filthy hope because
Well, I
it's
think I was born in filthy hope as well.
yeah. Can
Like,
you share?
yeah, so like I was born in 1969 and I was one of the forced adoptions. So what happened in the 60s and early 70s, but mostly the 60s, was the Catholic Church and the government decided that single mothers were not worthy of being parents, and they coerced, cajoled, drugged, and stole children from their rightful parents, mothers, and gave them to what they felt were appropriate married couples with little to no vetting. If you were married and you wanted a baby, you were given a baby. These mothers were literally lied to. They were forced to sign contracts before they'd given birth, which was illegal. They were told their babies had gone, which was wrong. So my mother's story, and I didn't believe her until after she had passed, and the forced adoptions were acknowledged. But when she told me her story, it turned out to be her truth. She was a single mother. She was with someone, and I now know a little bit about that. We can get into that later when we talk about finding my father and all that kind of thing. But basically, she was a single mother. She was going to be a single mother. She went to a single mother's home, which was run by the church, and then as she was giving birth, before she was giving birth, she was convinced to sign the papers because it'll be much easier now. You're not going to feel like it. So she signed the papers. She woke up. She was drugged. She gave birth. She woke up and she was told that her baby had gone to the family and that I would be better off and if she just went away and forgot about me and got on with her life. That wasn't the truth. I was actually still in the hospital. And I remained in the hospital for 6 weeks, and my birth parents didn't come and pick me up and left me there for 6 weeks because I had been vomiting into my ears and my ears got infected. And so I had all these ear infections. And so I couldn't go home until June. I was born in April. And I only know this story is because I was going through my baby book, and I saw this telegram. That's how old I am, telegrams. And it was like, please come and pick up your child on this date. And I took it out to my mum and it was like, I kind of knew I was adopted, but like, I was like, why? This is June. I was born in April. And she's like, oh, well, you were a very sick baby. And I couldn't bring myself to just leave you there. And I was like, oh, did you visit me? She's like, no, I didn't have the heart to visit you. I just, it would have killed me just to leave you there. So I just waited until you were well enough to come home. So I was basically left in the hospital for about 7 weeks of my life in a time where they didn't touch the babies because they felt you would bond with them. So the only time I got touched was when I was held to be fed. No wonder I became addicted to food because like food became a source of love for me. I've had a lot of therapy about this. And that it was like, food became such a source of like serotonin and dopamine and total attachment. So they left me in this day and age. Could you imagine like adoptive parents being like, oh, I'll just pick them up when they're well. I mean, the fact that they even allowed that to happen back then is outrageous, but it really was a precursor for the life that I grew up with them because she was extremely abusive, both emotionally and physically. She would beat me. She would torture me. She would do things like, you can't call me mother. It was very Flowers in the Attic, and so I didn't know whether I was allowed to call her Judith or mother. And yet she was super religious.
Yeah.
Super religious. Like she was like this born again Christian. My father was an atheist. And so I was caught in this world and I was like, my vision of somebody who was religious and talking of God and going to church every Sunday would torture me and beat me with belts and hairbrushes and feather dusters and canes and anything that she could get her hands on. She would just lose her crap and like just beat me up. And if not then emotionally, she would like leave notes in my drawers and things. Like she was like nuts, like mental nuts.
Yeah.
And she built me this little dollhouse bedroom that I wasn't allowed to get messy. So now like I'm a total mess because I'm like anarchy, live in filth. Who's winning now? And then he was a really violent drunk. And he would get drunk and he would threaten to shoot us because he had a shotgun and because we lived on a farm at this point. And, he would like literally just go, I'm sick of you. I wish you never had you kids and I'm going to shoot you. And, I took onto the aggressor protector role. So when he got drunk, I would be the one that was very combative and be like, you shut up and you can't talk to us like that and yada, yada, yada. And that was the environment that I was like so ready to get out of.
Oh my
it was
gosh,
actually 15 years and 9 months that I left, not 16 and 9. It was 15 and 9.
And did Judith, I think I met you and were you living in Gosford at that stage?
No, it's funny, you've got an amazing memory. My adopted dad was living in Gosford. So my parents split up. So my parents were splitting up around like when I was 15.
Yeah.
My brother had left home and he was like their golden guy. He was also adopted, but he was like their be all and end all. And then they were just left with the problem child.
Right.
And so it was like became just so horrendous. I was like, I'm leaving. So I actually went and stayed with my grandparents for a little bit in Wollongong.
Yeah.
And then my parents split up. My dad moved to Gosford. My mum moved to Sydney, and I moved back with her because I had no choice. Like that was my only choice.
And you're a kid, mate.
I was 15, like I was 16 by this. Well, it wasn't even 16 because I was 15 and like 8 months or whatever it was. I turned 16 in college, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was, I mean, always knew I was adopted, always wanted to find my family, always wanted, because like they were such awful parents. And so you could only ever get what was called non-identifying information.
Right.
Which was a birth certificate that had my mother's name was Kayleen. She was 21 when she'd given birth to me. She had blonde hair, hazel eyes, and she'd lived in Orange, I think. No, not even, didn't even have that information, but it was very limited information. So I mean, I don't even know how to tell this story because there's so many like choose your own adventures, because you were doing the theatre restaurant at Windsor.
Yes.
You decided to go to America where you meet your husband.
Yes.
And my best friend Zoe goes, hey, do you want to fill in for my sister? And I'm like, heck yeah, let's do some dinner theatre restaurant, acting, get paid, sure. And at the time, I hadn't found my mum yet. I was, 18 at this point, and maybe 19. And, so my boyfriend's a sound guy. We're looking at this girl and he's like, she could be your mum. And we're like, oh, don't be ridiculous. As if she's going to be my mum. And then I always say, be careful what you wish for, because she used to have this buckle ring, a silver buckle.
It.
I used to always be like, oh, I love that ring. I want you to give me that ring. How am I going to get that ring from you? One day. Yeah. Well, we'll fast forward to what happened then later. So years go by. The laws change. At 21, I'm allowed to get my actual information. They finally allow us to find out our birth information. I turn up on the day. This is how stupid the Australian government is. I turn up on the day. The very first day, it was a Saturday, and there's like 20 people standing on the steps, and it was this mistake. They had given the wrong date. And we all turned up and we're all sitting there. We all cried. The place was not open. Births, deaths and marriages was not open. They had given us all the wrong date. So it took me a long time to kind of get the courage to go back. So it was like probably another 8-9 months before I had the courage. I get back, I get the information, and I'm with Zoe, your sister.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, we've got the information. What do we do? So we find out her name is Kayleen Beverly Rochester and that she lived in Orange. And so Zoe comes over to my house and we go through
the white pages.
The white pages.
Yes. You better tell the listeners what the fuck the white pages are, AJ.
Yeah, right. It's a book with like phone numbers. And, you look up this, you go through and you're like, Rochester's in Orange. Okay, there's 4 Rochesters in Orange. And we had this whole plan, and Zoe rang and she was like, hi, my mum went to school with Kayleen and there's a school reunion and we just wanted to know, where she is. And the first 3 were like, oh, yeah, there's no Kayleen. And then the 4th one was like, oh, yeah, she's living in Blacktown. Here's her number. We were like, okay. And so then Zoe called again and she's like, hey, this might be a difficult conversation. I don't know if you're somewhere where you can talk, but I have someone who thinks they might be your daughter. And she said, oh my God, I've been waiting for this call for 20 years, or 20 odd years. None of us put the pieces together as to who this person was, but she was like, okay, come and meet me. And so we set a date because we didn't really swap a lot of information on the phone. And so we set this date. Zoe and I go again, and I've got all of my life's photo albums, and I've got flowers, and I've got
and you've
videos.
had your hair done.
All of it, right?
Yeah.
And bought a special outfit.
I remember.
It was all denim. I look back in it now. What was I thinking? God. And so we turn up and we pull up into this place, and Zoe gets out and Hans, the owner of the Windsor Tavern. So Hans and Kayleen, the owner of the Windsor Tavern where we had been performing, is out on the street. And I'm like, oh, hi, Hans, thinking, oh, you must be the name. Wow, what a funny coincidence. You live in the same street as my mum. Zoe gets it immediately. She jumps out. She's talking to Hans. They're kind of walking, and I'm like, excuse me. Hello, wait, hello, over here. We're going to see my mum. And Zoe keeps turning to me and going, Hans and Kayleen own the Windsor Tavern. I'm like, oh, I know. Duh. She's like, no. And they're kind of dragging me along, and they get it. And kind of drag me up into this house. And she's like, no, Hans and Kayleen own the Windsor Tavern. I'm like, oh, I know. And she goes, and we walk in the door, and Kayleen, the owner of the Windsor Tavern, is there. She goes, no, Hans and Kayleen own the Windsor Tavern. Kayleen is your mother. Kayleen's there looking, what are you two doing here? I'm waiting for my daughter to turn up. So she's got no idea what's going on. Everybody's confused. It's like, wait, what? And then she turns and she goes, and she's looking at me and Zoe going, which one's my daughter, if any of these people, or what are you doing here? And finally Zoe's like, she's your daughter, and we all hug and everybody's crying, and it was insane and like mind-blowing and just, I mean, one of the best moments of my life, like to look at somebody and know that I belonged to somebody and came from somebody, and to look like, it's really hard when you grow up adopted and you don't have any information. You feel really displaced and lost, like you don't exist. Like you are a figment of someone's imagination. There she is, Kayleen Beverly Rochester. She was so beautiful. She's so lovely. She was a model. Yeah. Oh, and there's a crazy story. Oh, there's so many crazy stories. So I mean, oh God, it's really funny. I don't know where to go next on this choose your own adventure kind of story. But one of the weirdest things, and you don't know about this, is that fast forward many years later, there's ancestry DNA, and I go on it to try to find my father and see if there's any siblings, and I get a match, for siblings, and I find my actual siblings, and I find a brother and a sister, and then ultimately another brother, and then maybe there's another couple more. And this has only happened like about in the last like 4 years ago. And so I met both of my brothers and my sister, we've since kind of lost touch. I mean, it's very hard to live this life and navigate this life without really having trouble with relationships, right? When you grow up and you're left in hospital for that amount of time and you have a non-loving familial relationship, one of the things I struggle most in my life is to keep ongoing relationships with people, because I I can cut ties so easily. You hurt me, you're dead to me. I'm like, I'm so used to being alone. That's where I exist. Not the happiest, but it's the safest, I guess. Anyway,
AJ, it's a bit of a skill, babe.
Right?
It's a protective mechanism that has kept you safe, and it's enabled you. And you're a baby that had no attachment, only to food. That's when you got touch. Yeah. I can fully appreciate why you'd want to cut people off at the kneecaps if they fucked you over.
Yeah,
I think go you.
I've had enough hurt in my life. I really am not going to take any more.
That's it.
Right. So anyway, but there was a time I did catch up with my sister, and we were like having like a good time, and she was very inquisitive. She could have easily have been a cop, but she had a cop's mind. She works in corrective services, and she was talking to her mum, and she's like, I got to work out. But we have different fathers, right?
Hang on.
No, sorry. We have the same father, but different mothers.
Yes.
Same father, different mothers. And so we're like, well, how did we, because my brother is only 5 months older than me. 5 months older than me. So he got 2 women pregnant at the same time. 2 women pregnant at the same time. So he ended up marrying her mum, and I now believe that Kayleen chose to not tell me who he was because he was also a violent alcoholic.
Wow.
So, and she chose to just cut ties and just be a single mother. She wanted to be a single mom, but they wouldn't let her, right? So anyway, my mom, Kayleen, was one of the house models at David Jones in Blacktown. You know those, and you see those movies like from the 60s, and they came out wearing all the clothes, and they do that. And I've got all of her photo albums and all of her pictures, and she was the house model at David Jones. And
so modeling gloves and bags and hats
and dresses, and and they would come out and they'd show the line of dresses, and people would order them, and they'd get kind of made to their size, and they would buy them. And so she was the house model. Well, as it turns out, so my sister was talking to her mum, and she's like, well, how could they have met? Like, when was, blah, blah, born? And she's like, well, I did work at David Jones in Blacktown. And so they were both working in the same store. And she was on the ground floor, and my mother was on the 5th floor, and he would clearly go to her and then to her, knocked them both up, married one, didn't marry the other. And I mean,
that's extraordinary. Oh, AJ, it just gets more degrees of separation. It's just a head wreck, isn't it?
and those degrees of separation also became even weirder because when my mum died, I decided that no, it was before my mum died. I was living in this house before my mum died. I was doing stand-up comedy, and it was in the same house where I found my mum. So I decided to go to America for a holiday, and I was ending my lease, and I was like, I had a good relationship with the real estate, and I was like, listen, the house is great. Come and have a look, but like, give me take the last month as the bond because you're not going to want the bond back, and I want to go to America. So the owner turns up and knocks on my door, and he's like, oh, listen, I just came to check the place. And he goes, you look really familiar. And I was like, oh, you might have seen me on TV because I was in some commercials and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he's like, no. And because I was doing a lot of stand-up, there's a lot of people who come and see you at the Comedy Store. So I went, oh, you might have seen me at the Comedy Store. And he goes, oh, my God, you're Kayleen's daughter. And I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, we came and saw you at the Comedy Store. Now, listen, who in this world, in all of the people, the population in Australia, ends up working for their mother and living in their mother's best friend's house? And this is where I believe, you talk about the filth of life and faith and hope. I truly believe I wanted to meet my mother so much that God, my God, put me in her vicinity. Put her there. So whether I was going to meet her or not meet her, I had such a short amount of time with her before she died, but I also had the time with her when I didn't know that she was my mum, when she was my boss. So I got a few more years with her that I didn't even know. And they're the very precious memories that I have. Thank God you went and met your husband, because none of that would have happened.
How good's that?
I mean, the coincidence, people don't believe you when you tell the amount of coincidences that happened in my life. It's insane.
And AJ, do you remember the story about Andrew Kalajic killing his wife?
I do vaguely remember it. Yeah,
the hotelier on the northern beaches at Manly. If Andrew hadn't killed his wife, I would not have gone to America and met my husband that year, because we were meant to go to Disneyland in the August of our final year of college, and then Andrew killed his wife, and my father was working for Andrew in commercial art, and Dad's accounts got frozen because it became a homicide.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I had the shit so badly that Mum and Dad had promised to take Zoe and I to Disneyland that Mum placated me by saying, don't worry, Ness, it's your 21st birthday. I'll give you money and you can have a ticket to go to the US. And I ended up going to the US with Mum's best friend, Melinda. And then you stepped in for me at the bloody
Windsor Tavern
theatre, and I was able to go, and I met Rob. So if Andrew hadn't killed his wife, mate, you mightn't have met your mum.
Yeah.
That's the filth of life, isn't it? And that's it's too big, AJ. It's too big.
But I do think that is divine intervention. If someone was to say to you, what is divine intervention? That is divine intervention to me. That is wanting something so bad and in your heart and soul so purely want it and need it, because I needed it. I was such a disparate soul. I had no one who loved me. I desperately needed that belonging, and I was given it.
Yeah.
Even when the law didn't allow me to know my mother, I lived in her best friend's house and I worked with her, alongside of her.
Yeah, in her total orbit.
Yeah.
God placed you, I see it as what I'd call a God incident. And it's just where God gets to intervene. And if you wrote this in a book and we produced a screenplay and made a movie, which is actually probably a bloody good idea, you should probably do it.
No one would believe it. They go, oh, that's just too convenient.
Oh, yeah, bullshit. There's a Hollywood story if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, that's the worst Lifetime movie I've ever seen. Breakdown on a village called Bethlehem, and on Christmas Eve, and your car breaks down and there's a handsome stranger whose father is going to take over the town. And okay,
who's going to believe that shit?
No,
it's just extraordinary. So thank you so much for sharing that part. What about with Kayleen? Was that so you find your mum and you've got all that beautiful belonging connection? all this intense emotion at the time, and I remember it. I remember being on the outskirts, watching and hearing about that through you and Zoe, and just everybody in your orbit was just so like captivated by this most incredible story. We knew how incredible the story was even at the time, and it never gets old for me. And I've actually preached your story many times, AJ. I remember I've asked you when I was at MLC school, I asked for permission to tell your story. And I remember, 1,000 girls at MLC school and girls weeping and crying, hearing about the hope in your story, because many of them were adopted kids. And so it was just, it's the hope that you bring to people is just, you must never underestimate that. It's a really palpable story.
Thank
But
you.
can I ask you, so you've got all this hope and this joy in your world at that point in your life, but it doesn't last long, does it, mate?
No. God, now you're going to get me crying.
Sorry, mate. Do you want to go there? Do you feel okay to go
Yeah,
there?
no, I'm good. Yeah, look, I mean, adoption's hard. I hate it. I hate it. I think it's awful. I think it's wrong. And I get that it helps people. I think the way it's set up is inherently wrong. And I do agree with, open adoptions. But I do think that if if we spend as much time helping people keep their babies as we do trying to take them away, then society would be better off for it, Why do adopted parents get so much more benefits than a single mother who's trying to re-educate herself and live and survive? I'm just inherently against it. And I understand that there are parentless childless couples and just childless people who desperately want a child and want the better. I get all of your world, but for me, my world, it was like the worst thing that happened to me. And so, oh shoot, I lost my train of thought. What was the question again?
There was all this beautiful hope in joy in
Okay.
life.
So, not my mind trying to not deal with it.
Yeah. Clever
So
what we do, isn't it?
yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. So I only really got 2 years with her, and I wish that there had been a counseling, they kind of opened this tomb and went, here you go, here's your information, have at it. And then my mum's telling me her story and I don't believe it. She's like, you were stolen from me. They drugged me. They told me you had gone when I was really there. I didn't believe any of that. Like, what? That didn't sound real. That just sounded like a mother who had just, was a model and didn't want to have a kid and like just didn't want her.
Yeah, wow.
And so I came from this space of hurt. She came from this space of loss and grief, which I didn't acknowledge and couldn't acknowledge because I couldn't get through my own grief. Yes. And so it was very tumultuous. But we also were like this like shooting star. We were burning so brightly, and it was amazing. We spent so much time together. We were on the phone every day. There were like learning, and I met my brothers, and that was amazing. I was part of a family. And then it wasn't even 2 years. Then she started going through a divorce, and it was messy.
Yeah,
messy.
Right.
It was so messy. And she was an absolute emotional wreck. And
was her divorce triggered by her finding you, AJ?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, he had an affair. I know he had an affair because the day of her funeral, his girlfriend moved in. So like, I definitely knew that there was like craziness on the horizon. I do know that the week before she died, or 2 weeks or 3 weeks before she died, we actually met. And she was like, I want to put you in my will. And, because she was in the process, she'd got her own place. I'd visited her in her new place. She had this cute little townhouse. And she was like really excited for the future. She wanted to get back into modeling because she was so beautiful. She could easily, she wanted to change her will. And they had a lot of assets. They had like ski lodges and hotels and stuff. There were a lot of assets and they were getting to be sold. And so, but it was a lot, and I was her only source of like downloading, and she would get on the phone and crying to me and being like, oh, this is happening. I wasn't emotionally equipped to be dealing with our reunion, let alone having to emotionally deal with her breakup.
And AJ, she was struggling to even recognize you as your own human being. She wasn't even calling you your name.
No, because she named me Donna, and she would call me Donna, and
Yes.
so it was. Yeah, my whole name is like gone through a whole cycle as well. It's like I was I was born Donna Marie. The adopted people, I don't even call them my parents, called me Leanne Susan Towler. And then I was like, well, I don't want to be any of your people. So I took AJ because a numerologist on the Fair Star said AJ would be a great name. So I was like, yeah, sounds good to me. And then I kept Rochester because that was my birth name. So Rochester is my true birth name. I wanted to keep that and carry that on. But yeah, so like, yeah, she wasn't, it was a lot. And this is probably my greatest regret in life is she was on the phone to me and I didn't have the strength. I was really struggling. And I said to her, my last words to her were, this is too much for me. I just need some space.
Wow.
And that was the last thing I ever said to her. And then not long after that, she passed away. Yeah. And so that's like, I'm very mindful as a parent now to never leave those kind of hurtful conversations hanging because you just never know what could happen. And to this day, it's very contentious because like a lot of the family, my real family, don't talk to me because I have spoken out about her death. I truly believe she was murdered. I do believe she was murdered. I do believe that she was murdered for the property and all of those things. And then I'll give you a veiled version if legally we can't say that. I do believe she went in very nefarious circumstances. I don't believe how she really went. And even the verdict is very weird. Here's the scenario, right? You decide. I'm not even going to like decide. You decide, right? She's dressed up, ready to go out, makeup, beautiful little leather skirt, all dressed up, ready to go out. She lives in one of those townhouses where you drive into the garage and then you go into the garage into the living room. So apparently it was cold and she had started her car up to warm up, but left the garage door closed, opened the living room door, was dressed up, had a glass of passion pop, and yet had sleeping pills, but was going out and then passed asleep in front of her stereo on the floor and accidentally gassed herself with her car.
Is that what the coroner said?
Yeah, how did it was accidental death. It's just bullshit. I mean, let's be real, it's bullshit. And so to get no closure, like to get no real closure from it is just really upsetting because you can never close the door on it ever. Right. And then then people are like, well, then did she commit suicide? And well, no, like the last thing I spoke to her was okay, yeah, I had said I need some space. But before that, she was very positive. But if she's dressed up to go out, and there's no suicide note, there's no way she would have not left a note. With all of the things that had happened between us, there is no way she would not leave a suicide note. It just, no way. But how do we know?
That
I need Netflix to reopen the case. It is actually like my desire to like at some point have someone invested enough because they interviewed the certain person that I believe did it. Because Zoe and I were like the Nancy Drew, Trixie Belden. We were like, no, this person did it. And we called the police and they were like, this person was a suspect. And yes, and the cop said to me, I know this probably doesn't help, but it happens all the time. There's just not enough evidence to prosecute. And they were like, we did question them for multiple days.
Wow.
But I truly believe with today's technology, like that it is like a secret hope of mine. You talk about hope. Yeah. One of my hopes is that chapter of my life gets reopened and investigated by somebody who is like, hey, crime podcast people.
Yeah, well,
have at it.
Have you know about the Christopher Dawson case, don't you?
Well, that's Zoe told me about that. That she's like, she was going to contact that person and be like, can you do her?
Yeah, wow. That's just an incredible thought, AJ. It's how do you ratify it in your brain? How did you do that at the time? Because you're only in your 20s. You find your mum and then you lose your mum. And you, I mean,
No, I was a mess.
yeah.
I lost my mind. Like I look back in that time, and that was actually a really, really, really dark time. I That's when I gave up acting. I still did stand-up comedy, but I got into drugs like bad. Like and I partied hard with comedians, and I would take everything and anything all night, every night, night after night, and just I'll never forget Faith Martin. So my movie came out, The Crossing came out, and it was the day after my birthday party. Zoe was at it, my 21st, and I had been doing coke all night long, and God knows what else. Uh and I went to the premiere the next morning at Hoyt's, and I was in the bathroom, probably, doing a bump, and Faith Martin came in and she looked at me and she goes, "Go home, get yourself cleaned up. Like this is not right for you. You deserve so much more."
So for
I
people listening,
didn't.
Faith Martin was an agent. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Faith Martin is a very respected agent,
Yes.
very, very well respected agent who forged the careers of many people, and she was the one who had really given me, a lot of my breaks because she really believed in me. Um, and no, I was a mess. I was a mess for a good few years, and I I'm trying to think like what got me out of it. I mean, I don't know. I think I got into radio, and like
That's right.
I kind of merged into like I wrote some parodies and I sent them into the station, and David Reimer, who was like this hot DJ, was like, "These are really good. Can I pay you $100?" I was like, "Yeah." And so they was like, and then Wendy Harmer's crew were like, "Can you write more?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then like a CFM on the go on the Central Coast were like, "Do you want to do radio?" I was like, "Yeah." And so I really just fell into like a time to be busy and distracted.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I got busy and distracted, and I was making money, and I was,
And did you get clean from the drugs at that stage?
yeah, I mean, not really, because radio was like full of coke, but not on the level where it was all consuming. I just
Right.
was busy. I was working, but on the weekends you would party hard. And I don't think it was really until I had my son that I did like a complete like, ooh, okay, here's a different way to do your life. Because like after radio, I came back to Sydney, and I was like partying with the spoken word crowd because I was then doing spoken word, and I was winning awards, and I was like, being lauded in the spoken word world. I guess once a writer, always a writer. And that was a crazy world. Like the spoken word world is like, it's everything you imagine in movies like Moulin Rouge, and this kind of hedonistic kind of crazy lifestyle where everyone's wearing flower crowns and velvet capes, and staying up till 3 a.m. to dance at the moon. And I mean, it was crazy. It was like
Wow.
bacchanalian kind of lifestyle in the inner city of like Newtown and Glebe, and it was crazy. It was like so bizarre. You could really imagine how like Edgar Allan Poe and like all those, how they all kind of lived in this kind of insular little lifestyle where they all just lived in this
Wow.
world of words and creation. And every week you perform in these places and you don't earn any money, but you're happy and you're, creative. And it was crazy. And then I got pregnant.
Yeah, wow. And that took you on another entire journey, didn't it?
That's what saved my life. Like
Yeah.
truly, because that really, like up until then, I was like, I didn't care. I would do whatever. I would take whatever. I mean, there wasn't a drug I didn't do heroin. Yay me. Well done. Oh, hashtag winning, making all the right choices. Um, but I mean, back in the days at the academy, I was dropping acid at our dinner parties and stuff. None of you ever knew, and I was
know you were doing that.
yes.
I wouldn't even have had a joint.
No, I was a wild child. I mean, I didn't have anyone looking after me, so I was like,
Oh,
I was the queen of poor choices. Let me tell you. But I didn't care because no one cared. So like, who cared if I died? No one cared. So like, I don't care. Like I just pushed the envelope constantly. And then I got pregnant, and it was literally, I was like, oh, I wasn't going to have the baby. It was an accident. And I wasn't religious. I didn't care. I was going to go and, be gone with you. And the irony was that I was 30 and I knew I wasn't getting any younger. And so there was this little part in the back of my brain that was like, oh, do you really want to do this? And I wasn't sure. And I turned up at the clinic, and there were all the people with the signs and everything.
Really?
And it was so surreal. And I sat opposite, and I couldn't walk through them. And it wasn't them. That was really just a visual representation of my own thoughts of going, I want to have this child. I want my own family.
Wow.
I want to be part of something. And so I went home, and I didn't drink. I didn't take any drugs. I never did another drug ever again.
Wow.
I literally sorted my crap out. I was living in like a shared household full of poets, and his dad was like this poet who was, I just knew I was never going to get much from them. So I really knew I was making the decision to like do this on my own.
Wow.
And part of me was like, I got to kind of do it for my mom as well, like, because she never got the chance. And I was like, well, here's your chance. Like, you think that she could have done it. Well, you could do it. So I did it consciously knowing that it was going to be on my own. Like, I was not kidding myself that there was going to be any kind of
support
at all. Right?
Yeah. And there was minimal, wasn't it?
Minimal, and only, coerced, and only out of guilt occasionally, and like misplaced kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
Very little. Call him the sperm donor, right?
Yeah.
Or actually more the sperm donut, because there was nothing in the middle. It was like, there's just nothing. But yeah, so I had Kai, and he like changed my life. Like, it was just extraordinary. I suddenly had a family. I suddenly belonged. I needed to live. So no matter how bad things got, he was the reason for being.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Like, and it was just bizarre, because like, having never belonged, I belonged. And it was just such a different. It's really hard to explain when you've never belonged. Like, if you've grown up in a family, you have a lovely family. Like, I love your family. I would love going to your family on weekends. Like, I was there every chance I got, because your dad was hilarious. Your mum was like this funny little hippie. And like, there was just so much love and support in that household that I'd never experienced in my life. So that was a drug for me.
But we loved you too.
Oh,
yeah, you were just a part of
love.
You were just a part of the, you just became another little sister.
I felt so loved in your family, like, and that's the thing that makes me cry. I really, your dad was so funny and so thoughtful. And I was constantly like, it was like, when you go to the zoo and you like look at animals that you've like never seen before, and you've grown up in like a family that has no family and like has no love, and you're like, you did that, and and that's what parents do. And like, it was this constant, like, your dad we were doing scenes, and he would build a fireplace for us because we were doing Lady Windermere's Fan, and he would make props, and people would make us snacks. And for someone who like literally survived, it was just such a wonderfully exciting place to be.
Well, it was a creative place to be, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
You probably loved that.
And like, the people I grew up with were like completely illiterate. Like, my mother had left school at 13, and my father had left school at 12, and he was completely illiterate. Like, couldn't read or write, and she was not really much better. And I was like this crazy smart kid who like was just
a smart kid.
Like, and they didn't like that.
No.
And so they would try to like crush it. And so I suddenly found this family like, wait, I can be weird, and I can write stuff, and we could make up poems, and we can write scenes, and you'll sit and watch.
Yes.
Wait, you've got time to watch me and say it was good. And
wow.
It was so lovely. And that's what I wanted to give to my kid. I was like, I want to give him all of the things that I never had.
Yeah.
And that's anything bad that happened after that, nothing was enough to dim the light of wanting to give my son the best life I could possibly give him within my means.
How incredible. And you've definitely done that. And I've watched your struggles in that time being a single mum, because being a single mum's not easy. And you didn't have a role model. You had no
No,
role model on attachment. You had
I had
no
no idea.
no. And so you've just gone full scale primitive on how to be a mother, working it out as you go along, doing the very best you possibly can.
Well, and having come from such a violent background, I was so determined to never lay a finger on my child.
Mm.
And, because I had been so horrendously beaten and bullied. So I was always so mindful that people are like, oh, you're too soft and, you're making these mistakes and stuff. Look, my son is 24. He is the most loving, caring individual. He is in the process of applying for the police force. He wants to help people. He is a valuable, beautiful, caring member of society. And, like I'm so proud. And he's just moved into this beautiful place that he paid for himself. Like he's got his first real apartment. And we sat on his apartment a couple of weeks ago on his balcony. This place is like this beautiful unit. There's 3 pools, there's 2 gyms. It's like it's all brand new. It's gorgeous.
Wow.
And he has worked really hard to get it. And I was like, I got all teary because I had nothing. I left home with nothing.
Yeah.
I had nothing. I never had any money. I could never catch up. I've always been
Yeah.
hand to mouth.
Yeah.
There's been weeks, if not months, where I've had $2 in my wallet and I would just live off my son's leftovers or just eat potatoes and bread because it was cheap. And, and to see him have that and be 24 and have a credit rating and have all these opportunities that I never had because I was so busy surviving.
Yeah.
Because like I look at that big portion of my life up until then, well, in fact, most of even him being a mother, I just survived, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I cried and I was just like, I'm so excited that you get to have a better life than I got. Like that's all I wanted. I wanted someone to be a part of me to have a better life because my life wasn't better because of all the things that happened. I just survived and got bumped around like a bumper car, in the whirlpool of life and what happened, right? And I was just like constantly treading water, not knowing how to survive and often making mistakes that had I had better guidance, I wouldn't have made those mistakes. And so to see him now is literally like I'm bursting with pride and happiness at my little rose, the little rose that I planted, and it's funny because I just started this tradition last year on Mother's Day and I started planting like a rose and I'm going to plant a rose every year for my mum.
Yeah.
And so that there's like that memory. And it was like,
I was just going to say, this is
my rose.
This is Kayleen's grandson.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's it's her grandson and she would have been so proud. That's what I was just going to say. Yeah.
So proud and so happy. And she so would have wanted to be around to be a part of that.
Yeah. 100%.
And that's the thing I kind of want to say is that it doesn't really matter how she passed, right? Like, okay, whatever. But in the times that I've had those dark moments where I have wanted to be like, oh, nobody cares whether I live or die, then I'm going to do it. Like, no one cares. The one thing I would, impart on everybody, somebody cares, somebody will care, right? If right now it feels like nobody cares, if you keep putting one foot in front of the other and you pull yourself up, someone will care.
Yeah.
And now someone does care,
Yeah.
and that the hope might not be right now, but it is there. It is there. It's ahead of you. And you just have to truly believe that there is hope, there is light. And I know it's really hard. Like I literally remember being times of my life where it's like, like what, who cares? Who cares? No one cares. Like no one's going to care.
But you made this family. You actually manufactured hope, didn't you?
Yeah.
And you made this family and created this attachment bond with your beautiful boy. And now you're doing this great life together. So you actually, and I often say this to Zoe, my sister, I often say, we get to rewrite the history and break the chains and break the bonds of abuse.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And we
Yeah.
break that by being hopeful and successful in raising the next generation.
Yeah.
And that's what you've done with Kai. I know I'm done that with my girls as well. And it's like, no, I'm not going to repeat the mistakes,
Yeah.
and I get to make it fresh and new and bold and brilliant and beautiful in the recreation of how we do life. And can I tell you, it's an amazing achievement. There's an Academy Award in Kai, AJ, and it's really, there's 10 Logies and an Academy and I know much of your backstory, and it's just an epic, like you say, pick your own adventure. We could do a whole podcast just on your life as a young mum and watching you do what you did. Can I digress and
Hold on, I want to say one thing, because you
Yes.
brought up your daughters, because I absolutely love watching you and your family and everything. But the one thing I really want other parents to understand, is that every child has their own timeline. And Kai was a late bloomer, right? And a very late bloomer. And it's really hard to not compare yourself to people, and you think, oh my God, you've got such a perfect life. Now, I don't know how much of your life you've shared with people, Vanessa, but I know that behind closed doors, you have this in front of everyone, what could be a picture perfect Disney World, but you two have traveled a filthy path, and just never compare yourself to people, because one, the outside appearance in social media is very different to the real path that almost every single person treads, but also every person has their own timeline. And I had to really, while everyone else's kid was getting their license, while every other's kid was getting their first job, while every other kid was graduating college, my son wasn't doing all of that. He had his own issues, which, I don't really talk about much anymore because he's on his life path and he's doing his thing. But those who know me know, and it's so important to just sit in your own timeline, and just accept that yours is yours, and you just help them on their victories until they are ready.
Yeah, that's it.
And when they're ready, they're ready. And then you get to enjoy all those things or different things, and you just can't compare yourself.
AJ, I've got to tell you a funny story. That's such a beautiful, for any young parents out there listening, that's a little piece of nugget of gold, because I've got one for you. I remember Ginger was 4 and she was late to not poo in a nappy, right? And we've pulled up to the kindy, and Ginger had a little routine. I'd pick her up after work and she'd have a pull-up on, and she would go and sit behind the car and grunt and do her poop into her nappy. And then she would say, Mum, I'm ready. Like, she was fully verbal 4-year-old. Mum, I'm ready. And then we had this routine. I'd sit her, I had a wagon, so I opened the wagon, changed her bum and put her knickers on. She wouldn't poo in a toilet. She was dry by day, dry by night, but refused to poo in a toilet. She didn't want to have that poo not attached to her bum. Anyway, I picked Ginger up from kindy, and we're at the kindy, and there was this very la-di-da Kellyville mum, and she said to me, oh, Vanessa, lovely to see you. What on earth is Ginger doing over there? I said, oh, she's just having a poo in a pull-up. She's a poo in a pull-up. I said, yes, she is, mate. She's not yet. And she goes to finish my sentence. You mean she doesn't go to the toilet yet? I said, oh, she wheezes in the toilet, and I'm trying to make excuses about why my child hasn't yet pooped in a toilet. And she says, she does the full judgy parent bullshitterama, and she says, well, Oliver, he speaks, I want to exaggerate now, AJ, 4 languages, and he's a rocket scientist at the age of 3.5, and he's just extraordinary. And I remember I was fast to anger because I was watching the bullshittery go on around me, and I turned to her as I could hear Ginger go, red face in the corner. And I said to this woman, put my hands on my hips, and I said, listen, love, can I tell you, if she gets to 21 and she's still shitting in a pull-up, I'll get her some therapy, but my guess is she's going to be just fine.
I love it. See, real parenting.
How ridiculous is it for us to even compare like that? Because we all develop at different stages in our lives, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Some shit in toilets early, some shit later. Who cares? We all get there in the end, right?
Yep, absolutely. You just got to cut yourself a break and just sit in your
Yes.
own lane and don't worry about other people's lanes.
Yeah, that's it. And it's so, so important. And great job, Mum. Great job.
There is so much more to AJ's story, so next week we'll be returning for part 2 of this interview with Ajay Rochester. We'll see you then. This is a prayer for the people who want to give up, who have been hurt beyond repair and cannot bear to see your face in anything. Find peace in letting go of